Okay. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Sci-Fi Podcast. My name is Tony,
And I'm Sam.
and this is going to be a bit of a podcast we're doing where we're diving deep into the psychological side of media and fiction, why it was created, what was the mindset when it was created, and the effects it's had on media and society around it. Today's episode is going to be on the fox spirit known as Kitsune from Japanese mythology.
Yeah, so the fox spirit, the Kitsune, is actually my favorite Japanese folklore. Tying closely behind it is the Yoko Ono, but that'll be a future subject. Now, with the Kitsune, it has a lot of interesting lore behind it, like a lot of interesting lore, depending on which area of the Asian countries you look. Like, if you look into the Chinese, they're often seen as nine-tailed foxes, who are kind of like heavenly beings. If you look into the Korean, they're known as the Gumyo, and they generally level up by eating people's liver, which is lovely. And then we have the Japanese version, the Kitsune, which divides into two categories most frequently. One is the celestial Kitsune, and then the other one is the yokai Kitsune. With the celestial Kitsune, they follow under the Japanese goddess Inari, who in more recent developments has been seen as the only 10-tailed Kitsune out there. And she's essentially the goddess of foxes, rice, I think even wine and all that kind of stuff. Like usually the harvest she's the goddess of. So and the Kitsune, the celestial Kitsune, are kind of her messengers. With the yokai, they're more natural. They have to kind of fend for themselves. Both sides are very mischievous, but the yokai tend to be more mischievous just because of what they have to deal with more than what the celestial Kitsune have to deal with. And with the yokai, you're also going to get a lot more malicious Kitsune than you are going to get with the celestial Kitsune. And it takes about 1,000 years for a Kitsune to get 9 tails, and after they get their second tail, and this is the interesting part, is that from what I've read, after they get their second tail, they are then able to transform into a human. And the more powerful they get, they can transform, or at least it is said that they can transform into other things like trees or other animals or things like that. Any living being, essentially. But they'll always have one tail that will tell you that it's a fox. Like, either there's going to be like an orb that they have to carry somewhere on them that contains their soul. So they'll either wear it as a necklace or have it somewhere on their person, and that will be an immediate tell that it's a Kitsune. Other than that, they can never truly hide their nature if they don't have the orb, because not every myth has the orb that allows you to tell that they're a Kitsune. So with the ones that don't have the orb, you need to bring them into a place where they reflect their shadow, which will show the shadow of a fox instead of a shadow of a person, by a water source, or even having a dog. And the thing with the dogs is that Kitsune and dogs do not get along, like at all. In fact, there's even a story in the Japanese folklore where a Kitsune marries a Japanese man, and he brings in a dog, and the dog constantly keeps attacking her. And she keeps telling him, well, you have to get rid of the dog because the dog keeps attacking me. And he's like, well, no, I'm not going to get rid of the dog. He's just not friendly to you. And she's like, yeah, I wonder why. And so eventually it gets to the point where the dog causes her to reveal her true form, which then causes her to have to run away. And there are multiple types of Japanese stories in this way where some other kind of creature, whether it's a Yoko Ono or a swan or whatever, they have this thing where if you see my true form, I have to leave. And so that's one of the myths. Another myth is where they mischievously tricked a wealthy merchant who was like being like one of those like greedy little money grubbers, and they tricked him to the point where he started running down the street naked, giving away money because of what the Kitsune did to him. And that brings about my point with them, is that they're not fully good and they're not fully bad. They're often more mercurial, and they reflect the what's going on in that day's era of society. They blend in with society, or they'll teach a moral of something in that societal thing, whether it's a good moral or a bad moral, whether they're the villain or they're not the villain. There's always some moral that a Kitsune will be teaching you within the Japanese folklore. So in that aspect, they are very cunning, they are very tricksy, they're very intelligent, and by the time they reach their 9th tail, they're almost seen as omnipotent. And their color will change from like regular fox color to white, and sometimes even gold, depending on the type of Kitsune it is. So for me, at least in the Myers-Briggs world, they would be mostly related to the ENTP personality type, and they've had a lot of interesting effects on the Japanese culture, especially where the 4th September of, like, I believe it's like the Saturday, the 4th September, or the 4th Saturday of September, or somewhere around there, there will be a fox wedding that goes on in one of the Japanese tribes, where people put on fox masks and they go through the temple and do their celebration and all that. So, yeah, they've had a lot of interesting effects with society, with folklore, with all of that. Yeah.
Well, from what I've known in media, from what I've read in media, from what I've seen in media, Kitsune seem to be represented in a bright light, usually. They are represented as mischievous, but usually have this feeling of maturity around them. If they're not very young or small, presented as children, as merely little girls, they're usually presented as very voluptuous, very grown-up women with a high way of thinking, or a more motherly scent when it comes to the people that follow them. Now, Kitsune, what I think was the reason they were created or were added to the mythology of existence, is because the people creating the mythology, the people creating the legends, had to have a strong figure that could show a way of fertility and a way of rising through level ups in a way. When they gain their tails, they obviously evolve, and they become smarter, omnipotent, as you said, at the 9th tail, and so far we only know Inari, as you said, with the 10th tail. In my way of thinking, I think Kitsune, the fox spirit, the celestial version, is reflects a lot about what people would expect from a goddess, a celestial being to be like, while the yokai is more of if it exists, it exists, and it definitely brings on questions of what the yokai could be, and if they really existed, just how powerful would they really be.
Well, like, the thing I find interesting is that, like, from what I was reading, is that with the yokai, well, no, not with the yokai, with the celestial Kitsune, the people were speculating that they were created because rice is a huge staple in Japan. Like, they hold rice really importantly in Japan. And what foxes often do is they eat rodents, when rodents would often go to these rice fields and they would try and eat all the rice and the stuff that was growing there that the Japanese people needed. And then these foxes would come around and like do their sneaky little tricks to grab the rodents, which is another way I think that the legend of the Kitsune, at least the celestial version, because they're related to Inari, who is the goddess of rice. I think that's how they got their messenger status, because they'd come along and they'd take care of the rodents that were coming to the rice fields. With the yokai, I think it was more of a things to be beware of, because with a yokai you don't know if you're dealing with a good yokai or if you're dealing with a malicious yokai, because yokai in Japanese lore as well aren't always bad and they aren't always good, and they're always ones where you have to be careful around.
Of course. Now, as we talked about the goddess, I really want to look at Inari herself. This whole thing where you also said that they carry orbs around them to
Yes.
contain their soul.
Yes.
I feel like that's a way to kind of humanize them in a way. So we all have a core, we all have a heart, we all have a brain that controls our body. And for them to have this orb that they have to carry with themselves to contain their soul, I feel like that's a very human thing.
Yeah.
Because in the end, the human soul is also carried by our body, which is basically a
container.
Yeah, a container for the soul, for the heart, for our very being. And I feel like that's a very nice way to make a divine being become more human than it really is. Because Kitsune and fox spirits in, for example, anime, are very friendly. They usually become either the main focus of a romance. They usually are presented as a way to grant wishes to the people asking for wishes, to seek guidance, to seek power. They're also I feel like this use of Kitsune, this use of the fox spirit in Japanese media is really widespread, as in it's able to be morphed into not just a simple thing. It can be morphed into multiple things. It can be morphed into a character. It can be morphed into a hero character, a character that helps the hero, a character that actually fights the hero, that goes against the hero, that is both a hero, an anti-hero, and a villain and an anti-villain, and it has this influence on the characters around it.
Which yeah, that brings about its I think in that way they've brought about its mercurial nature, because it can be all of those things and yet none of those things at the same time.
Exactly. So while on the yokai side, it's considered that yokai are not essentially good, they're not essentially bad. You just have to throw a coin or roll a dice to see which one you get, which I feel like is probably the best way to describe the Kitsune in itself. You never know what you could really get from a fox. Foxes are usually they're usually shown as these mischievous creatures. They like to steal, they like to hunt, they like to deceive. There's even, cat burglars, which are connected to the feline class of foxes. It's all connected. It makes a lot more sense that some fox spirits even like to steal the soul of people that they charm. For example, one of those characters is depicted in the video game League of Legends by the name of Ari. She has
Wait, she steals souls?
She steals souls. She charms the people that she meets. She sees the man, if she likes them or not. She charms them with her womanly vials and then steals their souls so she can keep herself young. Now, I don't know if any Kitsune from Japanese mythology do that, but I feel like that's another way to show off just how much impact a deity like that can have when it has the strength to do it. Now, usually charming and stealing souls is reserved for succubi, and incubi, the male version of it, and to some other more different mythological characters and beings,
Even Fae.
even Fae. Um, so this way of depicting the Kitsune is very interesting because they do. They probably have a way to steal a human soul if they have the power that they have. If they have this higher intellect and this magical being, they probably have a deeper understanding of the soul of a human because they carry theirs literally on their sleeve.
Well, the funny thing is there was I think it was a Korean live action, might have been a Japanese, I can't remember, but it was no, it had to have been Korean because the title was "My Girlfriend is a Nine-Tails Gumyo," which is the Korean version of a kitsune, and in that legend, she could take a person's soul and put it into her little bauble, and that is what would keep her alive, essentially. And one of the things she didn't want to do is that she didn't want to take the guy's soul because she loved him, so she refused to do that, even though she had the ability to do it. And when you were talking about powers, and the interesting thing is that when I was reading up on it, several sites stated that a kitsune's powers, when they reach closer and closer to the Nine Tails, and then even at the Nine Tails, is that their powers are essentially only limited by their imagination, and kitsunes are known to have very strong imaginations and tricks and thoughts that they can come up with, and they're like masters of illusion and trickery and just all kinds of mischief if they so choose to do so. So they're not, when they get more tails, they're not a foe that can easily be contested against, which I think comes from like the people, especially during that time, they had to have some kind of, because superstitions come about, they had to have some kind of superstition as to why one shouldn't be dealing with foxes. And then anyone who did deal with foxes, like just say like a caretaker of foxes back then, they were ostracized. They were kind of exiled from the village. They were not allowed near the village because the people saw it as a bad omen for you to be taking care of a fox.
So it's the same way as some Western media, some Eastern media as well depict taking care of a demon, for example.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So would you say that Inari in some place, the Japanese Kitsune, and for example the goddess, would be considered not celestial good, as in good, but demonic in a way?
No, Inari is always seen as extremely good because she's seen as the goddess of the harvest, and when people want more rice, more sake, more things, they will pray to Inari to help bring about a bountiful harvest. And she's seen as the good one. So in places where they worship Inari, they wouldn't so much as excommunicate or exile people taking care of foxes, because they'd see those people and they'd be like, oh, they're taking care of the heavenly messengers. Let's, leave them alone, because if we do something bad to them, our harvest will go into chaos. Whereas in other areas where they dealt more with the mischievous foxes or the foxes that destroyed fields, they would be like, oh, they're taking care of foxes, we need to send them away.
I see.
Yeah.
So, in a way, because they bring harvest, they bring happiness, they bring goodwill to people.
And they're adorable.
And fairly attractive, yes. Would you say that Kitsune could be depicted as the angels of Japanese mythology?
That's an interesting thought. They can definitely be seen as one of the types of angels in Japanese folklore. There are other types of messengers. I don't know what they are at the top of my head, but I would say that, yeah, for the celestial kitsune, they could be seen as the Japanese version of a class of angel.
Hmm. So, for example, then you would look at the yokai, because the yokai are, as said, depicted as mischievous. You don't know if you can trust them or not. Would you say that they would be, would you say that they depict more of the human side of the kitsune, the more humanoid side of it?
I would say they depict both the humanoid and the natural side of foxes combined. So, like, they have, like, the humans where you don't know if you can trust them and whatnot, and then, of course, you have the force of nature that comes along with being an animal or something in nature. And then you combine those two, like the force of nature and a human aspect, combine those two into one. And yeah, I would see that as being a kind of yokai version of a kitsune.
Hmm. So, I want to take this back a bit, and I want to talk about the story that you talked about, the dog story,
Yes.
where I found it really interesting that a normal dog, an animal, um, would discover a celestial being.
Yeah.
I
Well, it
find
wasn't
it
a celestial being in the story. In the story, it was a yokai.
Yeah, for example, still, because it's of a higher being, it's of a magical being. Would you say that animals have a bigger connection to the spiritual side of the world, if it were to exist, than humans do?
That's something a lot of people actually talk about and even joke about, especially with cats looking at something at the wall, and you go and look at the wall and you're like, there's nothing there. What is the cat looking at? Or a dog will be looking at something and barking at something, and you go and look and there's nothing there. And so people will often joke and say they can see something we can't, or they can notice something that we can't. They have a certain sense that we do not, like, we as humans cannot figure out. So I think a large part of a dog being able to find a kitsune in human form is because of the superstition or the thought that goes around that because dogs have extra senses that humans have, it makes sense for a dog to be able to notice something that a human can't.
I can get behind that. Yeah. So, for example, let's look at children as well. Newborn children, like babies. They sometimes look at things, they point at things that aren't really there. Would you say that the less sentient humans' thinking is considered like they know how the world works, they know how law works, they know how rules of the world works, how morals are supposed to go in the world that they live in? Do you think the more a person is connected or like disconnected to the world, the more they'll be able to connect with the spiritual world around them?
I think that, in a sense, yes, that is accurate, but I also think that for people who grow up and they start hardcore believing in something and then they start losing their imagination and they start losing their storytelling capability and they start losing all the things that they used to dream up when they were kids because they're told that you're becoming an adult now, you can't dream or think of such things. And so they start believing less and less and less and less and less in things. So when something unexplained comes about, they don't know what to do with it, or then they'll try and rationalize it. Whereas a person who is more imaginative, a person who is more open-minded, a child, a baby, a toddler, an animal, anyone who has more imagination or is kind of like more attuned to nature, I would say would have a better connection with something that is spiritual.
All right. Yeah, I can get behind it. Yeah. So, last thing I want to touch on with the kitsune and their evolution is the changing of their pelt, the changing of their fox color. I feel like the reason why they go from darker shades to brighter shades to even golden is because, in a sense, the brighter you go, the more to the bright side you look, the happier you'll be. The more the more you'll see the world, the more you'll see the world as everything is going to be okay, everything is going to be all right. I am attuned with myself. I'm happy with myself. I am who I am. I would like to look at Kitsune. The older they get, I would like to look at them as somebody who grows from immaturity and takes just how a normal woman, just how a girl would grow to a teenager, and then from a teenager to a woman, and then from a woman to a mother, and from a mother to a grandmother. I would like to look at Kitsune the same way, how they change belts, how they change the fox color, and how they gain their tails. The more they've experienced, the more they've evolved, the more they've learned about themselves, about the world, about the people that worship them, and perpetually the more souls they've sucked. I would like to look at that the same way how women work as well. They grow up from little kids. They're very vulnerable. They're very weak. They're very open to suggestion, to how they grow up, how they learn from their mistakes, how they learn from their inabilities, how they from their disadvantages, considered to, like, yes, the fox spirit, Inari, for example, or the Kitsune, once they reach nine-tail status, or like even 10-tail status, they're very capable. But there exist stronger spirits. There exist spirits who are not of animal or inspired by animals. There are spirits, yokai, and deities in Japanese folklore who could take on a Kitsune and have no problem with that, And for example, some of those are male spirits, male yokai, male celestial beings, and I like to look at that the same way. I feel like Kitsune, be it the yokai version or the celestial version, are depicted from whoever may have created it, were depicted from the person they loved. They were depicted from a woman they knew, a woman they cared for, and probably a father depicting his daughter or his wife or whoever, wrote about the Kitsune as a way when he saw his daughter grow, from the little fox tyke, the first snowball, to a full-grown woman, and the more she grew, the more tails she grew, the more womanly she became, the more powerful she became, the more intelligent she became. She learned the morals, she learned how to love, she learned how to take care, and eventually she, outgrew her father. She outgrew the man that initially created her, the man that came up with her, And I feel like that's where the Inari goddess came from, from that little daughter that the writer or whoever came up with the nine-tailed fox, that was like, I've taught her. She's learned everything she can. She is way above me. I'm just a human, and to me, she's a goddess. And I feel like that's where it all came from. I feel like it came from a man that just loved seeing how his either significant other or daughter or child or whatever grew, and he saw this process, this being of a human, and turned it into a celestial being, into either a yokai or a Kitsune, a celestial being. And I feel like this probably could be the closest way to describe them, if there aren't any other ways that
I mean, that is an interesting thought. I do know that Kitsune aren't always female. They can be male too, and are sometimes depicted in anime as being male. Like Yu Yu Hakusho had a Kitsune character in it who was a male, quite powerful, was a friend of Yu Yu Hakusho. And then you have, of course, Inuyasha with the little fox kid who was also a Kitsune. So they can be both genders, and but with the story of Inari, it's plausible, and of course, they probably maybe the woman was somebody who worked in the rice fields, and what they made from the rice fields, the person saw as the best of the best. Nobody else could bring in as much as she could. Nobody else could do as much as she could. She was the pinnacle. She was better than everybody else, and then could have elevated her into that status.
So, what So we look at the celestial side, but I'm gonna go back on my word. But what about the yokai side then? What would be an explanation for the yokai side? Why would they become distrustful? Why would they become like neither good nor evil? Is it somebody who has gone on the wrong path? Have they evolved from something else? Are all kitsune born from the same place, or are they born from humans and their mistakes?
Um, Kitsune are actually born from two different places. I'm not entirely sure how the yokai is formed. I know that the celestial ones are kind of created to be celestial, and then the yokai are just something that's part of nature. Nature itself is neither good nor evil, and nature itself takes on many different forms. And nature itself you have to be very careful with, because you don't know whether or not you're going to get something good out of it or something bad out of it. And I feel like with these foxes going around and playing their tricks, it just became this thing that it's just something nature gave, and you have to be careful around. Another theory is that they could be when the divide happened between the two groups, Izanami and Izanagi, when the divide happened and you got like the land of the dead, and then you got the like Yomi and all that, and Yami, and you got the divide, and you've got these different places. It could even be that the creatures that were once divine suddenly became not so divine. So that part of them that was initially one way kind of went more into a natural state of being, where it was no longer good or bad, it was just nature.
So, for example, they were all born from they were born for a simple cause. They were born to be guides. They were born to be messengers. They were born to give harvest.
Yep.
Would you say that, this is just my thinking, would you say that because of the way that humans or the people that believed in them or that didn't believe in them or that depicted them in a bad way, would you say that yokai were formed from disbelief and or hatred and or this dislike of the celestial version of the kitsune, and the yokai were born from the mindset that they are initially not good nor evil? They're more like on the middle. They're more like mischievous beings, just like a normal fox would be, just like the animal would be.
I think it would be more perhaps something based around superstition, maybe not something based on dislike of the celestial beings, but something that they've witnessed out in the wild or out back then where they couldn't explain anything, and they witnessed fox doing something that they couldn't explain, or they saw something at the corner of their eye, or they saw several things happen and they couldn't explain it, and they're like, well, it must be this thing. And from that superstition, it would have developed into the yokai nature of a kitsune, like a yokai kitsune.
So this is just what I want to say for the last thing behind the psychology behind the whole thinking of why it might have been created, how it might have been created. Essentially, they split into two parts. They split into the celestial being that helps human, and into the celestial being that could either help, mislead, or just trick a human. So would you say that it's actually a golden middle between them, between the celestial and between the yokai, that without this balance, the power of the celestials, the celestial version of the kitsune would be too strong, and there would be no dark side. There would be no side where, like, yes, it's a holy being, but there also exists a version of it that's essentially not good, and it doesn't really bring profit or like harvest or happiness. It just kind of is there. Would you say that without the two sides there, with having the celestial version being so up high and like so good and so profitable for a human being, and believing them and gaining the harvest from the good side, from the celestials, that it would become lesser, because they would always be able to, like, oh yeah, you know what, this Kitsune is helping us, we're getting harvest, whatever, just like pray once a week and like you get a good harvest. That would actually make them weaker, that they would actually have people believe in them less, because they would not believe that the good side is as good, like maybe because the yokai exist, there is such a strong belief that the celestials are the ones that you should be praying for, and the ones in the yokai are the one you should be, careful for. That's why I feel like believing in the celestial and hoping that the celestial actually exists actually gives them more power, and hoping that you don't get a yokai version of the Kitsune, and that you get the celestial side of the Kitsune, the one that actually will bring you profit, that will bring you harvest,
I mean, that's possible. Plus, I'm not sure how many of the myths have the celestial Kitsune, aside from Inari herself, appear as human. Most of the myths that I've read, it's usually been the yokai who have taken on human qualities in order to trick others. So, whereas like the messengers would always kind of appear in fox form. Now, I'm sure that there are like myths out there where they appear as humans to like help others and be a guide, but there are far more where the yokai are the ones who are either appearing as a human, possessing a human, manipulating a human, controlling a human. There's far more stories about that than there are on the celestial side. So I would say that it is a possibility for sure, especially since the Japanese have this whole thing about balance.
So, and altogether, the Kitsune are not good nor bad in the yokai side. They are essentially good. They're holy in the celestial side. They belong to a group of mythological creatures, of beings, of deities, that essentially started off good. Essentially started off as this is good, and then slowly transformed into. But there's also this side to it. Nothing that is holy, nothing that is great, nothing that is profitable. Never ever has just that side. There also has to exist a side that balances out the good with the bad, because if there's too good, you can't cherish it. You can't appreciate the good that you get without receiving some bad luck with it.
I mean, yeah, that is definitely something that if you believe in the balance of things, that where there's like light there must be dark, where there's good there must be evil, where there's this there must be that, to counteract hot, cold, so on and so forth. The whole idea of yin and yang, which develops a little more into the religion of Taoism, but with even Japanese Shintoism, there is this thing where everything has to have a balance, and without that balance, nothing can exist.
Yeah. So, we can say in the end that Kitsune might be good or bad, depending on which one you get. Hoping for the best, you pray for the rest, but in the end, you might just get, messed up, depending on how good you are, how bad you are.
Yes. And like even Celestial Kitsune can end up punishing you if you've like stepped out of line.
Yeah. It's like for example, no matter how well you treat your animal, no matter how well you treat another person, if they think you've done them wrong, if they think you've, did something that doesn't benefit them, that doesn't benefit you, that hurts them and hurts you, they would probably tell you. They would probably, try to act in a way that either benefits them, benefits you, benefits both of you. Like for example, punishing you for being for stepping out of line, like the same way a cat hisses at you if you accidentally, you know, step on its tail or like attacks you. You've done something wrong. Now you need to atone for it. You know.
Yep.
That's yeah. Okay. Yeah. So this is where I want to flip the script. This is where I want to flip the script on the Kitsune, and I want to completely change something. I want to make it a bit crazy. I want to make the Kitsune a bit crazy. What if the Kitsune and the yokai, the celestial version, the yokai version, are working together? Just think about it. They are in league. The yokai, they do mischievous things. They gain. They give the misfortune, they give the trickery, they give the mischievousness to humans. They trick them. They perpetually steal souls as well. And in doing that, the Celestials get all the hype. They get all this goodness. They get all this good feeling, while the yokai get what they want. They get this both imbalance and balance. They get this feeling of success, that they've done something with their existence, while the Celestials get this higher being where they receive praise, where they receive love for being the ones that actually are doing good, unlike the yokai.
I mean, that is an interesting thought, and there have been anime who, like, there has been in certain animes that has definitely talked about that, like Hozuki, where they work together, and like they're working together because both sides are getting what they want out of it. Like it's kind of like a business deal or transaction, and we're the currency.
Mm-hmm. So would you say that in an alternate situation, in the alternate universe, in mythology, they would use human souls as a way to sell, as a way to profit, as a way to exchange or trade between themselves?
From what I've gathered, they don't usually use souls to trade, but they'll use some kind of heavenly currency that both sides use, and they'll use that currency to be like, oh yeah, I'll get this soul for you in exchange for some of that whatever the currency might be. The soul itself would be like kind of the reward for, like, I want that soul to come to heaven, you guys need to make it to come to heaven. Or the other side would be like, I want that soul to power me up, you guys need to do something, or you guys need to let us do something so that we can power up via this soul. And there'll be this kind of like exchange going on, but the soul would be like the thing that they're buying rather than the thing that they're selling.
So, since we're on the topic of souls, could Kitsune also be Shinigami? A way of what Shinigami are.
Yeah, it's a
yeah.
death, the angel of death or death god. I don't think Kitsune would ever be seen as a Shinigami. They're not ones that, because a Shinigami's job is essentially to dictate when you're going to die, how you're going to die, where you're going to end up when you die. Kitsune doesn't really care about that. They just care about their own machinations for the most part. They don't deal with the fates of humans like a Shinigami would.
Okay, so let's do it like this. Let's say Kitsune existed, or they did exist. How much would they have to trade? How much would they have to share with other deities? How much would they have to make sure that you know what I'm trying to say?
That depends from, that depends on which side of the story we're looking at. Like, if we're looking at the side of the story that says that they require a soul to power up or do something, if we're looking at that side of it, I would say that they would maybe need, like, let's say one soul is worth 100 years to a Kitsune. Mm-hmm. So they would need a total of 9 souls in order to become a nine-tailed fox. Because the soul would contain the lifespan of the human, which would then be consumed by the Kitsune, which would gain all of that lifespan, thus being able to elevate into a position far faster than it normally would.
All right. Yeah. Do you think other deities, other celestial beings would get along with Kitsune?
Aside from Inari?
Aside from Inari, yeah.
I think so, yes. There are other, like Izanagi is sometimes known for using Kitsunes, and he's kind of like seen as the Zeus or the Odin of Japanese folklore, like he's the first male god. So he gets along with Kitsune. I think Amaterasu would get along with Kitsune because she's kind of like a... from what I know of Amaterasu, she's not like a super cruel or mean person, but she's more of a person who's guided by her emotions. So she might find Kitsune to be adorable, and she'd probably want to pet them. I don't think Susanoo would get along with Kitsune, especially since if the game Okami has told me anything, he'd always go and attack the wolf, and in the folklore he wasn't exactly the nicest person, so I don't think he'd be terribly fond of the Kitsune, even though he ends up being seen as a hero in the end. So I think it would be like kind of like it depends on the god and what they're for and what their personality is, which would then depend on whether or not they get along with them.
Yeah, I can get behind that. Huh. So let's look at it this way. Let's look at it like in a human way. What if we take Kitsune and their characteristics, their knowledge, their intellect, and we strip away their powers, and we turn them into human beings? What type of human beings, what type of people do you think the Kitsune would be?
They would be, if we're looking at it in the world of Myers-Briggs, like I stated before, they would be a lot closer to the ENTP or even ENFP side of things. They would be very cunning women. Some of them would be even vixen-like. They would test people. They would do things. They would poke at people and see what made them tick. They perhaps maybe even people who constantly play pranks on people, like have this kind of like enjoyment of playing pranks on people, such as like when a teacher walks into a classroom and you get that dust thing or chalk thing falling on the teacher's head, or a bucket of water, or any of those kinds of pranks. They'd probably do that as well. They'd probably be the ones who would go, if they're female or and even male, they would be the ones who would, if they find a fancy in someone, they would be the ones seducing them. They wouldn't wait. They'd go and get what they want. And they would try and be as seductive as possible in doing that, or as tricksy as possible in doing that. They'll have some kind of cunning method to get the man or woman that they're going after. They would be highly intelligent, extremely witty, and some of them might even could turn out to be lawyers, just to see what would happen, on either side. They'd be people looking for something fun to do, and would probably be the type of person that gets bored very easily if they don't have something that challenges them. They would be they'd be a person where you don't know if you can entirely trust them, but then once you get to know them, you know that like no matter what, even though they're playing pranks and are being mischievous with you, if they've grown attached to you, they'd like be fiercely loyal to you. So
let's create a kitsune. Let's create a human being that is a kitsune. How would you think that person would look? For example, body type. Would it be more voluptuous? Would it be more, for example, a female, a male? Would the male be more of a macho man, or like would he be lean with some muscle here?
He would a male. If we were to like create a male kitsune, I would picture them as like a wired male, not someone who's like super bulky and Arnold Schwarzenegger like, but someone who might be more like Keanu Reeves body type, or like even maybe a little bit more leaner than Keanu Reeves. They wouldn't be like the super bulky bodybuilder or wrestler type. They'd be the one that you don't expect power from them. For a woman, they would exude sexuality. Like, just right off the bat. Like, as a girl, they'd be extremely adorable. Into teenage years, they're, like, becoming more and more sexy, or, like, I don't know. They're developing into their maturity and, like, vixen type area. And then as an adult, they would definitely be very kind of like very
womanly, very
not so much woman, like they would be womanly, but they'd be like, they would exude sex appeal. That's the word I was looking for.
Like peak femininity.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So from aside from body type, we would say they would probably have either red or blonde hair, for example.
Yeah.
And then complemented by probably the fact that they carry orbs with them. They would probably have like
jewelry,
like
necklaces,
jewelry, carrying necklaces.
Rings.
They would have
bling. They would definitely have bling, and they'd probably definitely be high end.
Mm-hmm. So, going from the side of, they would be lean. They would have brighter hair. They would have more flamey, very very attractive hair. They would probably have either blue eyes or green eyes, for example, to complement their spiritual capability.
I would say, yeah, either of those would work. I would even say, if you want to add kind of some exoticness to it, like bright yellowy hazel eyes would add an exotic look to that person, especially if it was like more yellowy in it. It would have a very interesting, almost unnatural but highly attractive quality to it.
Mm-hmm. So let's give them a more like character description. They are outlooking, they are attractive, they're charismatic, they are, they go at situations head first, but they do think about them. What zodiac sign would you give a kitsune, for example? What would you say they would be? Because I'm personally thinking either Aries or Leo.
I don't really follow astrology or zodiac signs. I can tell you various personality types they can be, but I wouldn't know. Okay. I wouldn't know their zodiac sign, because any person can be like an Aries, or any person can be like a Sagittarius. It is not limited to the month you're born in. Yeah. And I don't know too much about it. But whatever the sign is that like has a more outgoing and trickster side, I would go with that one.
So it's Pisces, probably the fish.
Yeah.
Or twins.
Yeah.
So it would be a combination between the outgoingness of Aries, the hot-headedness, the easily distractedness, the distrustfulness, the type of people where like they get bored of one person, but if they find the right person, they will keep them forever. They will love them with passion, and the mischievousness, the the cunningness, the way to find themselves out of situations, like twins and fish, because they have multiple faces. Would you say that they would be become pathological liars, for example?
They don't have to be, but they can be definitely people who are extremely witty. Like they can become like if they're like more on the bad side, they can become pathological liars. But if they're more on the good side, they could be more ones who know how to weave and manipulate words. Mm-hmm. So like they're not lying, it's just they're making you think of something even though they didn't say it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I can get behind that. So what personality type would you say they would have?
Like I've said previously, ENTP, because they're known for pushing buttons, they're known for being mischievous, they're known for wanting to see what will happen if they do something. They enjoy watching the outcome of something after they've said or done something. And they can be very, like, they enjoy pranks as well. Just to, like, see what kind of rise can I get out of this person? What kind of thing can I get out of this person? But they're also very charismatic. It's a very charismatic type of personality. It's a very outgoing type of personality. It's a personality that thrives on ideas and coming up with new ideas and like is very, very imaginative. So definitely an ENTP or an ENFP because they're the more outgoing sides of the imagination spectrum of coming up with new ideas or seeing something and coming up with an idea, or then seeing a person and wondering, I wonder what that person will do if I do this, and then they go and do it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I guess. So here's where I want to finish this, because it's already been about an hour.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about a lot. We talked about the mythological side, their creation, how they might have been created, why they might have been created, who might have started this whole evolution of the Kitsune. We also talked about the capability of how Kitsune could be seen in human people, like who they could be, what they could become, and how they might become that. We also looked at all the different types of things where they could be, depicted as human beings outside of Japanese culture
Mm-hmm.
and Japanese mythology. And we also looked at the different things that make it the way it is, the cunningness, the voluptuousness, the beauty, the different ways it's been depicted so far, mostly in anime, mostly in Japanese media, of course, but also in video games.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that Kitsune altogether are some of the more fleshed out mythical creatures, mythical beings, mythical deities.
Yes.
In Japanese folklore,
they've
had time to grow. They've had time to evolve. They've had people who have looked into them, who have created so many different ways for them to be depicted, so many different ways for them to shine, that no matter how much you looked into them, no matter how much you studied them, no matter how much you tried to understand them, I feel like Kitsune is one of the deities, one of the mythological creatures that is going to be forever changing, is going to have different versions of it constantly being created, constantly being improved, constantly being just depicted in so many different ways that you can't really find a golden center for them. So you'd never be really able to explain them correctly. You can only look at the facts and the things that people have created so far and move on from there and keep deciphering them every single time something new is created.
Yeah, that's definitely true. They are definitely one of the more fleshed out characters in a lot of mythology. In part because they are such mercurial creatures that it's hard to pin them down to just one area. Like, they'll always have their cunning and their mischievous nature, but apart from that, there's just so much on them that it's just hard to pin them down to just one area.
Yeah. And especially because we have one center goddess who is, of course, Inari, and then all of her, I would say, children.
Yeah.
For example.
Yeah.
And then the yokai version, which are probably like distant cousins,
or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. So yeah, I feel like this was nice. I feel like we looked at it. Well, I learned some new things. For example, I got to think about it in a different way, because I've always seen Kitsune as the hot moms, for example, in all the animes, where like they just pop up and they're like always so voluptuous, always ready to give a hand to the hero in trouble. You know, they're very feminine, very busty, very jumpy, very plump, for example, and they're always like, so, oh, hello there, and like stuff like that, you know. And I didn't actually think there would be, you know, such a thing behind it. I didn't really connect them to rice or wine, as you said. I connected them more to just, you know, passion and explosiveness, and this.
Well, they're not really explosive creatures. They're more subtle.
Yeah, I mean, in the looks wise.
Oh well, yeah, definitely explosive looks. That's for sure.
You know, and then
if Ari says anything.
Yeah, if anything, like this is the thing with Ari in League of Legends. She's depicted in so many different ways, considering her voice acting, that I just it bothers me to what detail they went just to get something out of the voice actresses they hired. I sometimes listen to the voice lines and I close my eyes and I feel like I'm on the wrong side of the internet.
Hey, if I played League, I would main Ari. That's for sure.
Good luck with that, because she's pretty hard to learn.
Fair enough, but I don't play League, so I can just appreciate her looks.
Yeah, there are, and here's another thing. In League of Legends, for example, all the different skins that were created for Ari, they really try to express her in all the different ways. And the most recent one is K-pop.
K-pop, yep.
And it's such a take where like you make this being, which and there was also Arcade Ari, and I think was
Star. Wasn't there like one that was like Star Girl Ari, something like that?
Yeah, Pop Star Ari, you know, and she has this like feeling of, this does not look like she's doing the job she should be doing. This looks like she's doing a completely different job. Like it's like the Johnny Sins of League of Legends. So that's why sometimes I the way they presented her there, and the way they present Kitsune and in other media. For example, there was an anime that recently came out from a manga, which I don't quite remember the name of, but it's about a ghost called Yuna.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
I know exactly which manga you're talking about.
Yes. So recently it came out in the manga. Spoilers.
I've read it.
Yeah. Recently it came out in the manga that the reason why she's tied to that inn is because she's tied to a daughter of a man that is trying to make so many different versions of her.
Yep.
Of his daughter, so
in order to revive her. Yeah.
So he can, you know, heal her of her illness, you know. And she's a fox spirit. She's a celestial being, and she can connect herself with a spiritual medium, which is the main character. Which was trained for that. He was trained to get possessed by ghosts and by spirits.
Yep. And not only that, there's also a little girl, Kitsune.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and recently, I think it was last season winter, High School DxD.
Oh yeah, I need to watch that.
I think it was called Born or whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
It it had a young kitsune, a young fox spirit with, I think it was 6 tails or something like that. Very like a little girl-ish, or maybe she.
So it was a
tails.
lolly kitsune, a lolly
Yes, a
9
lolly
tails.
kitsune.
I mean, considering that they can change shape to whatever they want, I mean, okay, I guess.
She was depicted as actually the daughter of the current leading kitsune of the shrine that got captured. So this is where, like, I was thinking about it while you were explaining, you know, the age and maturity, and they can change shapes. Would somebody at a young age, would a kitsune at young age, with enough power, be able to evolve to 6 or 7 tails if she had enough spiritual power?
No. Unless we're going with the consuming souls theory or the eating livers, it requires something that will allow them to gain 100 years worth of whatever in order for them to suddenly so essentially she would have needed to gather 600 years worth of energy or souls. So 6 souls or 6 livers or whatever many livers are required, whichever area you look at. She would have needed to consume that much stuff before she would have been able to get the 6 tails. Otherwise, she would have had to wait 600 years.
So I guess you could say it's not like mythologically like accurate. It's
yeah.
Not like...
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was just put there so they have, you know, like a cute fox girl just to...
Pretty much,
yeah.
Because everybody likes a cute fox girl.
Everybody likes everybody likes a girl with ears and tails.
Yeah. Even cat girls.
You know. Yeah.
Which is a completely different subject.
Which is a subject we can talk about at a different That's gonna be for the 18+ public.
Yep. Need to add in the bunny ears as well.
And the butt. No, hold on. Yeah. Well, let's get to the outro.
Yep.
My name has been Tony.
I'm Sam.
This video, this episode has been sponsored by my mom and probably Sam's sister, who have to live with us, making such a racket talking about these things late at night or in the afternoon.
Yep.
I hope we're gonna be able to have more of these episodes because this is really fun, and I hope people that actually listen to this or are listening to this had a good time, and I'll be seeing you guys next time. Best of luck. Gracious greetings. I love all of you.
And bye. Just so that you guys are aware, next week we will be looking at the succubi. Until then, we'll see you guys later.
Goodbye.
Bye.